30 million workers have lost their jobs. That's bad. And yet millions of those workers have also lost their health care because their health care was attached to their jobs rather than being seen, as is the case in every other major country, as a human right. So one lesson to be learned is that health care is a right for all people, not just a job benefit. We need Medicare
One lesson
for all.
that I've learned, at least in this primary process, was that if you are going to use revolutionary talk, you should mean it. If you're going to say we're going to fight the Democratic Party, we're going to fight the media establishment, we're going to fight the drug establishment, we're going to fight the gun lobby, we're going to fight all of these people, and you have all of your soldiers behind you, then you need to be willing to wage that class struggle, and you need to be willing to be relentless in waging that class struggle. For all his revolutionary talk, Bernie Sanders was not willing or had the aptitude in order to wage that particular brutal, relentless fight in order to topple, you could say, the established order of the Democratic Party. I hate listening to videos like that of Sanders because I always think to myself, you had the opportunity to try to push this through, not just from the standpoint of whether or not you won in the Democratic primary, but also depending on how fanatical you were in trying to get your policy agenda accomplished, potentially even running third party. Again, the point becomes, what is your ultimate objective? Is your ultimate objective to get these policies accomplished because of all the chaos and the devastation that's taken place in the public? I mean, for God's sake, Bernie Sanders was making the argument that people were sleeping on the street, that people were losing their health care, that people were cutting their insulin because they couldn't necessarily afford the dose, that people couldn't afford their rents, that they're living paycheck to paycheck, meaning the majority of the population, that despite this being the richest nation on the planet, despite productivity going through the roof, you still have people not having, the majority, $500 in the bank. These are travesties. I mean, these are, catastrophes for individuals to have to deal with day after day after day. Then all attacks that are available to leverage against Joe Biden are permissible. And yet, we couldn't even get the more basic of contrast or even highlighting the fact that Joe Biden was lying about all sorts of things that he got caught with in the 80s. And even when Sanders' lieutenants and surrogates came forward and tried to make that argument, whether it was Teachout, whether it was David Sirota, whether it was Nina Turner, Sanders rapped all of them on the knuckles, put them to the side, wouldn't even bring out opposition research. This was not somebody that waged a battle. This was somebody who just wanted to give speeches. Sanders had 30 million people that were not associated with the Democratic Party. And when Joe Biden wanted that support, if Bernie Sanders flamed out, and he made the point, look, if you want that support, you need to support Medicare for all. And then he points to the polling showing that 69% of Americans are on board for Medicare for all, and that there is no excuse for you not accepting that. And if you don't accept that, then these 30 million people are not going to vote for you, and you're going to lose. When you turn around and point to them and say, you made us lose, we are going to say, you goddamn right, we told you you were going to lose. You were more interested in not accepting concessions than you were for beating Donald Trump, a man who you said is going to basically bring the end of the world. Put that in perspective. As opposed to taking Medicare for all, something that 69% of the public says, yes, we are on board for, especially with 30 million people losing their health insurance, Joe Biden said he would veto that particular legislation that the majority of the public is on board for. I hope you understand what I mean by this. The majority of the Democratic Party is amply on board for it to the tune of more than 69%. And if you are running in the Democratic primary, it makes all the sense in the world for you to back policy that the Democratic Party is on board for. The saddest thing about Sanders is for him to run this race. I actually believe he believed in those things. He just doesn't have the ability to pull it off. When asked why, Chris Hedges had a conversation with Bernie Sanders. And Chris Hedges basically makes the point that Bernie Sanders was running scared. He never wanted to be considered Ralph Nader and the way that Ralph Nader was vilified and attacked for running in that race. I'm going to show you the video that Chris Hedges basically makes the point that the reason that Bernie Sanders ran the race in the way he did is because he didn't want to be considered Ralph Nader. Massively disappointing. My name is Jamal Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, if you dig this content, please like, share, subscribe. You can always support PayPal, Patreon. I'm not going to keep this video long. The intro went longer than I wanted. But basically, Chris Hedges makes the point that he had a conversation with Bernie Sanders. And in that conversation, Bernie Sanders made the point, basically, that he didn't want to be considered Ralph Nader. And because he didn't want to be considered Ralph Nader, he was always limited in the type of race that he could run and the type of race that he could pursue, because in the same way they were blaming him for Hillary Clinton losing, he didn't want to be blamed for Joe Biden losing. That's so pathetic that you're going to run a race under the idea that you're going to lose that race. You needed to pursue that race to all of the powers at your disposal. And to go in comparison, when the Democratic Party on the debate stage was given the same opportunity of whether or not to lose to Trump or to allow Sanders to take it, all of their response to the individual, to the man, to the woman was, we would prefer to lose to Trump, and we would rip it out of Sanders' hands at a convention if given the opportunity. My point is, Sanders needed to be willing to run the race in the exact same way that the Democratic Party was going to run a race against him. Otherwise, he had zero chance of winning this contest. It is massively disappointing that Sanders didn't do that. Let's hear Chris Hedges, talk about his conversation with Sanders.
In 2016, I did an event with Bernie Sanders and Bill McKibben, Naomi Klein, and the Socialist City Councilwoman from Seattle, Shama Sawan. And Shama pushed Bernie before the event. I was there as to why he wouldn't run as an independent, arguing correctly that we were never going to build an effective political movement in an election cycle, and we were not going to build it within the confines of the Democratic Party. Sanders' answer was that he didn't want to become Ralph Nader.
From the standpoint of the left, we've made a catastrophic mistake over and over and over again, regardless of what the Democratic Party did. The left, for over the last 40 and 50 years, lumped itself into the Democratic Party, believing in this kind of narrow-focused pragmatism that we must choose the least worst candidate. By not enforcing a standard, however, by not drawing a line in the sand in regards to what you're willing to accept, or for that matter, what you're not willing to accept, you've allowed the political space, the Democratic Party, and by extension, the Republican Party, to move further and further to the right. For example, Obama made the point that several years ago he would have been considered a Republican. Obama is absolutely right, but that Republican is now, or was, the Democratic president who ran on the idea of hope and change while giving 95% of the income gains to the top 1%, was perfectly willing to cut Social Security, enshrine Bush tax cuts into law, etc., etc., etc. The same thing with Bill Clinton, basically pushing through one Republican policy after the next. The point I'm trying to make to you is that the Republicans of old are now your Democrats. And at some point, somebody like Trump will be running in the Democratic Party, to which people would clap like lemmings that that's the person in order to hold back the night against whatever the Republican is at that particular time. The point I'm making here, and the reason why I said we've made a catastrophic mistake, is because we never held the line. Our responsibility was to ensure that the population at the rough edges of the capitalist system was ameliorated. But instead of doing that, we lumped ourselves in with a party that was every bit as much captured by corporate cash as the Republican Party, under the mistaken belief that we were doing less harm. The catch is, the elections can't be looked at in this kind of narrow-focused pragmatism. When you look at it over the course of time, you find that it wasn't all that pragmatic at all. But again, you've moved further and further to the right, and your candidates have gotten worse and worse and worse. Under that lens and that grading scale, the left has utterly and entirely failed, especially in the context of what we consider to be getting our policy agenda accomplish. If you are going to get anything accomplished, whether you're a Democrat, whether you're a socialist, whether you're a Republican who cares about Medicare for all, whether you are an independent, whatever you are, whatever your political distinction, if you've just gotten tired of the political process, and you no longer engage in it because you realize that nothing comes back to you for the energy and the work that you put into it, stand beside me under this idea of just policy. Even if the policy doesn't go far enough because you're a socialist or a communist or somebody further on the left, that's not important. What is important is that all of us come together under this very specific banner where all of us can stand in solidarity and vote in lockstep of either yes or no, depending upon whether or not a candidate, all through the congressional, everything else, accepts or rejects our agenda. If they accept our agenda, they get our support. If they reject it, they don't. This is important because this is what political leverage is. Just because you don't have the ability to actually win and occupy the square doesn't necessarily mean you can't necessarily influence the political process. You can. And not just influence the political process, the more of us that are able to unite under this idea of policy is skewing issues of party. If you're going to vote for a party, I would say vote for the Green Party since that has your best policy agenda. But more important, to be able to stand under this idea of saying, this is what we want, this is our demand. The very fact that we, at that point, represent a clear interest of policy, call us the new left if you want to call us anything, that is specifically a clear and concise demand. It's time for the left to do something different. Even if it means the Democratic Party losing, so what? The party itself was perfectly willing to lose if it meant to stop you and your policy agenda. If you want to get anything real accomplished, you need to stop considering yourself a Democrat and start considering yourself something else. Just call yourself a lefty. The fact that Joe Biden does not represent the policies that the Democratic Party wants should have in and of itself been a disqualifier. And at least from the standpoint of the left, it should still be a disqualifier. 51% of Bernie voters are either third party curious or definitely looking at a third party. I would say that number should be higher considering. But at the very least, that number, if that number stands under this idea that this is the policy we want, you either accept it or you don't, is loud, is vocal about it, you will start the opportunity, or you will have the opportunity to be able to start to grow something that will actually give you a legitimate chance to get policy accomplished, as opposed to the last 40, 50 years of failure, lumping yourself in with the Democratic Party, but no concessions. Like, share, subscribe. Thanks all.